members of House Targaryen fireproof? It does seem like a straightforward question, but as I was researching this video, I found out there was actually quite a lot of confusion and misconceptions about this topic within the A Song of Ice and Fire fanbase than I expected there to be. In fact, even in my own comment section, I've seen people arguing the case for and against it. While it is true for newer fans of the series who maybe found George R. R. Martin's books via the HBO show Game of Thrones, they might view it through the lens of the show's interpretation of Daenerys Targaryen in particular. But this debate and misunderstanding seemingly goes deeper than just the show, because I actually found many discussions on fan forums dating back well before the show debuted, debating how fireproof Daenerys is. So despite Game of Thrones muddying the waters, there is still a significant number of book fans who believe Targaryens are inherently fireproof. If you take a quick look at some of the more modern fan spaces, such as Reddit, there are still many posts made since the show ended, and especially since House of the Dragon began, asking if Targaryens are fireproof and debating that topic. It seems the Dance of the Dragons and the dragon aspect of this really highlighted this issue for some people. What I think has confused many newer fans is the fact I've found several very popular AI-generated TikTok and YouTube accounts that are mixing both show and book canon when talking about lore, creating kind of a 1 + 1 = 3 situation. A lot of people will take these accounts at their word and not look into it further, hence why I still think this issue is still being debated, despite the facts of it being very clear as far back as 1998. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down the idea of Targaryens being fireproof by looking at evidence for and against it from the main books and expanded lore, and also take a look at, frankly, the authority on the matter, with some of George R. R. Martin's interviews and blog posts. When the fire died at last, the ground became cool enough to walk upon. Sir Jorah Mormont found her amidst the ashes, surrounded by blackened logs and bits of glowing ember, and the burnt bones of a man and a woman and a stallion. She was naked, covered with soot, her clothes turned to ash, her beautiful hair all crisped away, yet she was unhurt. A Game of Thrones Chapter 27, Daenerys 10. The idea that Targaryens might be fireproof goes back all the way to the final chapter of A Game of Thrones, where Daenerys hatches her dragons on Khal Drogo's funeral pyre. Walking into the flames, it seems she's surely going to die, only to be found when the flames had died down, alive, naked, with no hair, but otherwise unharmed, and with 3 baby dragons. There is a lot to this event that is left up to the reader to interpret, but there is also a lot of contextual clues that can send us on our way. However, from the information we are given by the time the dragons hatch, and if we look at A Game of Thrones in isolation, apart from the other books, I can understand why some may have come to the conclusion from the hatching of the dragons that Daenerys is fireproof or has fire resistance. For example, the first time my fiancée read the books, she assumed Daenerys had innate magical ability, pointing towards her tolerance for very hot baths as a clue, as well as her dragon dreams. But if we are being honest, much of this idea of Daenerys, and thus Targaryens being fireproof, has come as a result of the creative choices HBO made with Game of Thrones. Targaryens, while not fireproof, do seem to have a high tolerance for general heat, and this is something the show did highlight a lot more clearly than the books, such as Daenerys and Viserys both having extremely hot baths, Daenerys being unburnt after picking up the hot dragon eggs. While these events do happen in the books, they are brought a lot more into focus in the TV show. Then we get to the dragon hatching itself. While not burning off Daenerys' hair is clearly a creative choice to perhaps allow Emilia Clarke not to have to shave her head, it did kind of accidentally reinforce this fireproof concept more than it does in the books. For a while, the show didn't really dig that deep into the matter, but eventually they doubled down on the fireproof Daenerys idea in Season 6, when Daenerys sets alight the hut containing all the gathered Khals, walking out of the flames unharmed. So in the show, they were going with the idea that Daenerys was fireproof, When you add into this the concept of her also being known as the Unburned, and also her comments from both the books and the show regarding fire not killing a dragon, you can start to understand why this idea of Daenerys being fireproof came to be such a prominent, misunderstood idea in the fanbase. But here's the thing with Daenerys hatching her dragons, and not being harmed by the flames. In the book, we know that she is not fireproof, as there are instances in later books where she does get burned, in particular by Drogon in A Dance with Dragons. So I think this idea of Targaryens being fireproof came about for two reasons. The show's impact on how people view book lore, and the books themselves leaving much of this for the reader to connect the dots, and thus some misunderstanding this concept. Something that is easy to forget is these are huge books filled with massive amounts of detail. It's very easy to overlook stuff and not connect things books apart. I mean, this is the reason theories like R plus L equals J became such a rite of passage for many book fans. Most book readers did not connect the dots regarding Jon's parentage the first time they read the book, because they were likely overwhelmed with so much other information. I know it's definitely something that I didn't put together at first, until I began to explore the fan community more deeply. So when they do find out about the concept of R plus L equals J, it fundamentally changes how they then view the books and how they will read the books in future. The proudest city in the world was all gone in an instant. Its fabled empire vanished in a day. The lands of the long summer scorched and drowned and blighted. The thoughts of Tyrion Lannister on the Doom of Valyria. A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 33. Tyrion 8. I find the decision the show took to make Daenerys fireproof because she's a Targaryen extremely odd, because, if anything, all of the world lore George R. R. Martin created directly contradicts this idea of fireproof Targaryens. Even within their own show canon, they contradict themselves multiple times. In fact, I think Daenerys' line, "Fire cannot kill a dragon," is taken way too literally. The first place to take a look at is the Doom of Valyria, the cataclysm that destroyed the Valyrian Empire and left House Targaryen the sole remaining dragon lords in the world. We know that Valyria was located near a chain of active volcanoes called the 14 Flames, which of course, given the nature of volcanoes, means lava and fire clearly played a role in the Doom of Valyria, killing the Valyrians and dragons alike. Thus, dragons are not immune to fire, nor is being fireproof something in the Valyrian genetics. George R. R. Martin literally had the downfall of the Dragon Empire be fire-based. That's why I found both in the books and the show, Dany's comments after Viserys is killed by Drogo, "He was no dragon," Dany thought curiously calm. Fire cannot kill a dragon. Such an odd, contradictory thing for her to say, and a quote that if you Google, fans have been arguing about for years. But for me there's a simpler answer. It's supposed to show us that Daenerys is fallible, and can and will get things wrong. We must remember she's a 13-year-old girl who spent her whole life running from city to city, with her only source of information on her family history and heritage being her elder brother, Viserys, who of course would want to glorify it and all things House Targaryen and Valyria. It is a very Viserys thing to say. So when you consider that Daenerys' idea of House Targaryen comes via the lens of Viserys, her attitude and naivety to the reality makes a lot more sense. If your whole idea of your family and history is coming from vague history books and your half-mad brother, you're not really going to have an understanding of the reality of it. So the key message here is Dany is not an objective and reliable source of information for her own family history. I mean, how would something as impactful to the lore, such as the Dance of the Dragons, have worked if Targaryens could not be killed by fire? In my mind, there are 3 parts of the dance I believe firmly prove that Targaryens and people with Valyrian heritage in general never had this innate fireproof ability. Prior to the dance, there's only been one dragon-on-dragon battle since the Doom of Valyria, between Maegor the Cruel and Aegon the Uncrowned in 43 AC, in the battle below the God's Eye. The thing is, it wasn't really much of a fight given Maegor was riding Balerion the Black Dread, versus the much smaller and younger Quicksilver, very similar to how Aemon One Eye kills Lucerys Velaryon in Shipbreaker Bay. So in my view, the Battle of Rook's Rest is the first true dragon battle since the Doom of Valyria, where we have dragons properly fighting each other. Of course, Princess Rhaenys and her dragon Meleys are killed in the battle, with Rhaenys' charred body found next to her dragon. Her body was so blackened and badly burned, they could not even be certain it was her. In that very same battle, Aegon II is very badly burned, with burns reportedly covering half of his body, with it impacting him enough that Aemon One Eye has to now act as his regent while Aegon recovers. If Targaryens were fireproof, then Rhaenys and Aegon would not have been burned as badly as they were at Rook's Rest. But it goes deeper than that. If Valyrians, or at least Dragon Lords, are innately fireproof, what would be the point of dragons at all, as weapons of war? We know dragons were at the very heart of the Valyrian power base, and while they were outwardly used to conquer huge parts of Essos, there was too lots of infighting and wars between different houses of dragon lords vying for power. If the other Valyrians cannot be harmed by fire, it would kind of make these conflicts pointless unless you're relying on the sheer strength of a dragon and not necessarily the dragon fire. But there are some interpretations of the lore that suggest the infighting between the Dragon Lords was more cloak and dagger and political rather than what you would call a conventional war and battles. Elsewhere in the Dance of the Dragons, there are also several other examples of Targaryens meeting with fiery ends. While it should be fairly obvious by this point, I wouldn't watch past this point in the video if you don't want to know what happens for the rest of House of the Dragon. But one of the versions of the death of Prince Daeron at the Second Battle of Tumbleton states he was killed inside his tent when it was set on fire at the start of the battle. We then also have Rhaenyra's well-known end, where she is burned and then eaten by sunfire on Dragonstone, and the often forgotten about case of Baelor Targaryen, who also suffers some burns from her short fight with Aegon and Sunfire as she tries to escape Dragonstone. None of these things should be possible if Targaryens and by extension Valyrians were fireproof. Under the sheets and in the wood piles, wherever you Targaryens spilled your silver seed, mushroom to Jaehaerys Velaryon when asked where to find more dragon riders. Fire and Blood, the dying of the dragons. Given the topic of fireproof Targaryens, I think it is worth bringing up the idea of the Sowing of the Dragonseeds and the implication it has on this concept. We don't know exactly how many people took part in the Sowing of the Dragonseeds, but we do know from Maester Munkin's true telling, 16 died and 48 were burned or maimed. Now also consider that we don't know if all who took part in the sowing were of Targaryen descent, such as Steffon Darkland, and possibly even Nettles. We cannot even say for sure if those who claim to be Dragonseeds are in fact that. But what the sowing does highlight is something that's important to this discussion. Even if we say only half the Dragonseeds who took part in the sowing were true Dragonseeds, then that's a hell of a lot of cases of people with Targaryen descent dying to Dragonflame and getting burned. Secondly, the claiming of a dragon is not easy and is inherently dangerous, seemingly even for members of House Targaryen. If we cast our mind back to the reign of King Jaehaerys and the story of his rebellious daughter Sarah Targaryen, something that played a part in her exile to Oldtown, other than her affair with Roy Connington, is the fact she escaped her confinement and attempted to sneak into the dragon pit to claim a dragon, something which angered both her mother and her father. So obviously seeking the king's consent is normally part of claiming a dragon, something Sarah did not do. Fire and Blood emphasises Jaehaerys' comments about how dangerous and foolish it was. If there was any indication a Targaryen was fireproof, or that claiming a dragon is still not that dangerous for a Targaryen, then Jaehaerys' comments here kind of confirm it. They filled her bath with hot water brought up from the kitchen and scented it with fragrant oils. The girl pulled the rough cotton tunic over Dany's head and helped her into the tub. The water was scalding hot, but Daenerys did not flinch or cry out. She liked the heat. It made her feel clean. Daenerys Targaryen, A Game of Thrones Chapter 3, Daenerys 1. There may be some evidence to suggest that Targaryens, while not fireproof, might have some sort of heat resistance or tolerance. There are two instances that come to mind when it comes to Daenerys in particular. During her introduction in A Game of Thrones, when she is being prepared for her meeting with Khal Drogo, she states how she likes the heat of the water as it makes her feel clean. It's implied the bathwater is scalding hot and way too hot for a normal person. We see this again in A Clash of Kings, where Daenerys comments how her bathwater is scalding hot, how she likes it. Oddly, Daenerys is not the only Targaryen we know of who likes to take scalding hot baths. We also know this is something King Aegon V did as well. It would make some sense, if not exactly fireproof, if Valyrians did have some kind of magical or genetic predisposition to heat, given they are from a volcanic region and ride fire-breathing dragons. We know Valyrians practiced a lot of blood magic and did lots of selective breeding with animals, creating all sorts of hybrids. It would not surprise me if this ability to resist heat somewhat is something they intentionally bred or introduced into the dragon riding families. A lot of people believe that Viserys' death contradicts a lot of these ideas, but we must remember heat resistance is not heat immunity. We know Targaryens do burn, and I suspect having molten gold poured over your face is not something a slight heat resistance is going to help you with that much. I remember a time before Jon Snow's parentage was confirmed by the HBO show that an argument that many made against Jon being a Targaryen is the fact he badly burns his hand, saving Jeor Mormont from the White Attack during a Game of Thrones. If the Targaryens are fireproof, which we must recall some book fans do often believe, how did Jon get burned? But as we can see from the established lore, being a Targaryen would not stop Jon burning his hand. There were countless Reddit threads where people believed this was a smoking gun or a plot hole in the writing, and is something that did come to my mind the first time I heard about R+L=J. We must remember, not all fans are deep into lore or fan theories, and newer fans do have to start somewhere when they come out of reading the books for the first time, with their own ideas and theories that then evolve and change more and more as they reread the books again, or fall down the rabbit hole of A Song of Ice and Fire fan theories. You are cruel to come to my hill. Cruel, I gorged on grief at Summerhall. I need none of yours. The Ghost of High Heart, to Arya Stark. A Storm of Swords, Chapter 43, Arya 8. For me, the most open and shut evidence that Targaryens are not fireproof, that comes directly from the main book series and not necessarily Fire and Blood, comes in A Storm of Swords, when we first learn about the tragedy at Summerhall, something that effectively shaped the story and allowed the timeline that exists to play out the way it did. We don't know exactly what happened at Summerhall, other than most of the royal family were there. Only a handful of those present survived. Jaehaerys II, Sarah Targaryen, Aerys II, Rhaella, and the newborn Rhaegar, and of course Mr. Aemond, who was at the wall, being the only Targaryens left in its wake. King Aegon V and his eldest son Prince Duncan are the only Targaryens to be confirmed to have died in the fire, but given the contextual clues, there is likely several more who were present at Summerhall who died and are not named. We think that Aegon may have been trying to hatch dragon eggs using wildfire, which got out of control, but the tragedy at Summerhall would be a hell of a lot less tragic if everybody there was fireproof. At the end of the day, if the context of the lore is not enough proof about this, then all we have to do is look at the words of George R. R. Martin himself, who's addressed this issue many times over the years, both before and after the HBO shows chose to make Daenerys fireproof. In his blog in 1998, George wrote the following: "Some fans are reading too much into the scene in Game of Thrones, where the dragons are born, which is to say, it was never the case that all Targaryens are immune to fire at all times." He would expand on it again in a 2003 interview, where he stated, "No, Targaryens are not immune to fire, but, importantly, he gave us context about what actually happened with Daenerys in the funeral pyre, which puts a lot of this debate to bed." He said, "The thing with Dany and the dragons, that was just a one-time magical event, very special and unique. The Targaryens can tolerate a bit more heat than most ordinary people. They like really hot baths and things like that, but that does not mean they are totally immune to fire." So Daenerys being fireproof at the end of A Game of Thrones was directly linked to the hatching of the dragon eggs at the end of the book, and was a one-off, very special magical event. Some speculate it could have been something to do with the Red Comet. Others that it was blood magic enacted by Miri Maz-Dur and her shadow dancing to save the life of Drogo. Then the concept of death paying for life, with her burning on the pyre and that blood sacrifice being part of what hatched the dragons. Or it could be a combination of the two, of the red comets and the blood magic. But when we actually take a step back and think about it for a second, the words of House Targaryen are fire and blood. What is it that Daenerys uses to hatch her dragons? The fire of the pyre. Above in the sky, a blood-red comet. Or even the blood of Mira Mazdur as a blood sacrifice. We know House Targaryen didn't use house words prior to the conquest, but I do like the idea that Aegon the Conqueror chose the words fire and blood because of the very literal meaning it could have in the hatching of dragons.